Listen closely, because this is not a story meant for everyone. Imagine for a moment that something quietly shifts in your awareness. You cannot explain the quiet weight in your chest, or the strange calm mixed with curiosity. But deep inside, you sense that a door in your understanding has just opened. This is not a coincidence. And this is not a story for people who are not ready to hear it. Let me tell you a story. A story about someone who never knew how much they were truly cared for. Someone who walked through life feeling ordinary, unnoticed, and sometimes deeply alone. But behind the scenes, behind the curtain of everyday life, something entirely different was happening. There was a person in their life. Not a stranger. Not a distant legend. Not a face from a documentary or a name from a rumor. Someone familiar. Someone so close that their presence felt normal, even unremarkable. To the world, this person was respected, admired, sometimes misunderstood, and often envied. They had spent decades building something meaningful. Wisdom, resources, connections, quiet influence. They had learned things the hard way. They had failed, risen, failed again, and kept going. But to the one person in this story, they were simply there, present, familiar, almost invisible in their familiarity. And that was the secret. Because this quiet believer had been watching for years. Not in a strange way. Not in a controlling way. In the way that someone who truly cares watches. They watched when no one else was paying attention. They noticed how the other person treated people when no reward was promised. They noticed what happened when life became unfair. They noticed whether kindness was chosen over revenge. They noticed whether integrity won over shortcuts. They saw everything, but they never spoke openly about it. Why? Because they understood something important. Something that most people never learn. If they had spoken too soon, the other person's growth would not have been real. Every success would have been questioned. Every achievement would have been followed by the whisper. You only made it because someone helped you. That whisper would have poisoned everything. So they stayed silent. They stayed ordinary. They stayed in the background. They watched from a distance as life tested the person they believed in. They watched the struggles, the late nights, the doubts, the moments when giving up seemed like the only reasonable choice. And through all of it, that person kept going. Not because they knew someone was watching, but because something inside them refused to quit. They kept falling and rising. They kept choosing honesty even when no one was looking. They kept showing up even when no applause followed. They had no idea that their quiet struggles were being seen. They had no idea that someone was taking notes on their character. They had no idea that every small, good decision was adding weight to a scale they could not see. But someone was watching. Someone was noticing. Someone was waiting. Now let me take you deeper into this story, because what happened next is where the real lesson begins. The quiet believer did not just watch. They also acted. But they acted in ways that could not be traced back to them. They opened doors without leaving their name. They sent help without signing the card. They created opportunities and then stepped back so the other person could walk through them alone. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever received help at exactly the right moment? Have you ever met someone who gave you advice that changed everything? Have you ever found a door open when you expected it to be locked? Have you ever felt protected when something should have gone terribly wrong? In this story, all of those moments trace back to one quiet believer who never wanted recognition. They believe that the best help is the kind that looks like luck. Because when help looks like luck, you still own your success. When help looks like luck, you still believe in your own strength. This is why the quiet believer stayed hidden for so long. They wanted the person they believed in to develop real confidence. Not borrowed confidence. Not confidence that disappears when the helper leaves. Real, unshakable confidence that comes from surviving things on your own. But here is the difficult truth. Staying hidden came at a cost. Every time the quiet believer watched the other person struggle, a part of them wanted to step in openly. Every time they saw pain or disappointment, a part of them wanted to say, "I am here. You are not alone." But they did not. They swallowed their pride. They stayed silent. They watched and waited. Because they understood something that sounds harsh, but is deeply loving. Sometimes love looks like letting someone struggle. Sometimes protection looks like staying invisible. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone fight their own battles so they can discover their own strength. This is the sacrifice that is rarely recognized. Because it leaves no visible evidence. No one thanks you for the help they never knew they received. No one celebrates the pain you absorbed in silence. No one applauds the doors you opened without leaving your name. But the quiet believer did not need applause. They needed something else. They needed to know that the person they believed in would one day be ready. Ready to handle the truth. Ready to receive everything that had been quietly prepared. Ready to carry forward something bigger than themselves. And so they waited. They waited through years of ordinary days. They waited through seasons of struggle and seasons of growth. They waited until the person had been tested enough. Until their character had been proven enough. Until their heart had been softened enough to receive the truth without being destroyed by it. They waited for the right moment. And that moment is the center of this entire story. Then came the moment when everything changed. The quiet believer's time on earth came to an end. As it does for all of us. There was no dramatic farewell. No long speech. No final explanation. Just silence. And then, after the silence, a discovery. In the quiet believer's final wishes, something unexpected was written. They had left everything they had built to one person. Not to the loudest person. Not to the person who asked the most. Not to the person who shared their bloodline. Not to the person who expected it. But to the one person who had never asked for anything. The name on those final documents was not written impulsively. It was written with certainty. With clarity. With years of quiet observation behind it. There was no confusion. No contradiction. No last-minute change of heart. The decision had been made long before the final days. It was simply waiting for the right time to be revealed. When the person in our story learned about this, they did not know how to feel. Their first reaction was not joy. It was confusion, followed by disbelief, followed by a strange heaviness that they could not name. They kept asking themselves the same question over and over. Why me? Why not someone who was closer? Why not someone who shared blood? Why not someone who had done more? Why not someone who asked? Why not someone who expected it? The answer to that question is the most important lesson in this entire story. The quiet believer did not choose based on obligation. They did not choose based on guilt. They did not choose based on who had the strongest claim. They chose based on who had the strongest character. They chose based on who had proven, through years of unnoticed moments, that they could handle responsibility without being corrupted by it. They had watched others in their circle. Some were loud but unreliable. Some were charming but selfish. Some were talented but dishonest. Some were close in distance but far in values. Some expected everything while offering nothing but expectation itself. And then there was this one person. This ordinary, unnoticed, struggling, persistent person. Who never asked for anything. Who never expected anything. Who simply kept going, kept trying, kept choosing integrity even when no one was watching. Who treated people with kindness even when there was nothing to gain. That person was rare. That person was valuable. That person was the only one the quiet believer could trust with everything. Now, here is the most powerful part of this story. What was left behind was not just money or possessions. It was a message. It was a quiet confession. It was a revelation that explained years of strange moments that had seemed like random luck. The help that appeared just in time. The protection when things could have gone wrong. The opportunities that arrived without explanation. The people who appeared out of nowhere and then disappeared just as quietly. All of it traced back to one quiet believer who never wanted recognition. All of it was connected. All of it was intentional. And none of it was an accident. When this realization began to sink in, the person in our story felt many things at once: gratitude, confusion, sadness, wonder, regret, even a little anger. Anger for the silence. Anger for the moments they wished someone had stepped in. Anger for the truth arriving after it was too late to ask questions. Anger for all the years they felt alone when they were never truly alone. All of these feelings are natural. All of them are valid. But beneath all of that, something deeper began to emerge. Something that would change everything. Understanding. The person in our story began to see their own life differently. Not as a series of random events. Not as a string of accidents and coincidences. But as a path that had been quietly protected. As a journey that had been silently supported. As a story that had been written by more than just their own efforts. Conversations they had forgotten replayed in their mind with new meaning. Small gestures they had dismissed now seemed massive. Ordinary moments they had ignored now felt sacred. Faces from the past suddenly made sense. Relationships that had seemed confusing now had context. Doors that had opened at exactly the right time now revealed the invisible hand behind them. They realized that they had never been as alone as they once believed. Someone had been quietly protecting their path. Not by controlling them. Not by removing all obstacles. But by believing in them. By investing in them silently. By making sure that when the truth finally arrived, they would be strong enough to carry it. This is where many people in this story would lose themselves. They would become obsessed with the past. They would replay every interaction, searching for signs they missed. They would turn reflection into regret. They would ask themselves, "Why didn't I see it sooner? Why didn't I say more? Why didn't I appreciate them while they were here?" Do not do that. That path leads nowhere but pain. The past unfolded exactly as it needed to. If the truth had come earlier, the person would not be who they became. If the help had been visible, the growth would not have been real. If the quiet believer had spoken too soon, everything would have been different. And not necessarily better. The quiet believer understood this better than anyone. That is why they chose silence. That is why they chose patience. That is why they chose to believe in time itself. They did not want gratitude rooted in dependency. They wanted respect rooted in understanding. They did not want a follower. They wanted someone who could stand on their own feet and then choose to carry something forward. That is exactly what they got. Now, here's what happens next in the story. And this part is just as important as everything that came before. When the truth becomes known, the world around the person begins to shift. Not because of magic. Not because of fate. But because people notice change. Even before anything visible happens, people sense that something is different. Conversations feel different. Situations carry a new kind of energy. The way people look at the person changes, even if no one says a word. Some people come forward with sudden warmth. People who were never around before now want to be close. People who never asked questions now want to know everything. People who never offered help now want to be involved. This is not necessarily bad. But it is something to notice. Some people express surprise mixed with hidden feelings. They smile while their eyes show something else. They congratulate while their tone carries something unsaid. They say, "Good for you," while wondering, "Why not me?" This is human nature. It is not evil, but it is something to understand. Some people question whether the person truly deserves what was given. They whisper behind closed doors. They raise eyebrows in private conversations. They say things like, "It should have gone to family," or "I never saw them do anything special," or "There must be a mistake." This is also human nature. People resist what they do not understand. People question what they did not expect. The person in our story does not need to defend anything. They do not need to explain. They do not need to justify. They do not need to prove their worthiness to anyone. The decision was made in clarity. The intentions were recorded. The reasons were thought through over years, not minutes. And none of those reasons weaken under scrutiny. The quiet believer anticipated all of this. They knew that when the truth came out, there would be questions. There would be doubts. There would be whispers. There might even be challenges. That is why everything was structured carefully. That is why everything was documented clearly. That is why the decision was made unshakable. They protected the one they believed in, even in absence. Even after they were gone. Even when they could no longer speak. Their final act was not just a gift. It was a shield. Now we arrive at the deepest part of this story. The part that most people never understand. The part that changes everything. The real gift was never about money. It was never about possessions. It was never about status or power or recognition. Those things are just the wrapping paper. They are the surface. They are what the world sees. But they are not what matters most. The real gift was perspective. It was the sudden ability to see your entire life differently. It was the quiet realization that you were never as alone as you thought. It was the healing of old wounds that came from feeling unseen. It was the answer to questions you had stopped asking years ago. The real gift was knowing that someone saw you. Truly saw you. Not the version you showed to impress the world. Not the mask you wore in public. Not the performance you gave for approval. But the real you. The tired you. The struggling you. The doubtful you. The you that appeared in silence, in exhaustion, in moments when no one else was watching. Someone saw that version of you. And they believed in that version of you. Not despite your flaws, but including your flaws. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Not because you had everything figured out, but because you kept going even when you did not. That is the gift that cannot be taken away. That is the blessing that keeps giving. That is the truth that changes everything. The quiet believer did not leave money. They left meaning. They did not leave assets. They left assurance. They did not leave a fortune. They left a foundation. They did not leave instructions. They left trust. And trust is the rarest gift of all. At this stage in the story, the weight of this truth is no longer abstract. It has moved from thought into feeling. And that is where it becomes impossible to ignore. The person in our story begins to notice a quiet shift inside themselves. A sense that something has ended and something else has begun. Even though nothing visible has changed yet. This is the moment where understanding deepens beyond logic. They realize that what was left to them was designed to awaken awareness first. To feel the gravity before touching the power. To recognize that stepping into this new chapter carries consequences, not just privileges. This is why the realization feels solemn instead of celebratory. They are standing at the edge of a truth that demands maturity, not excitement. This is where the identity of the quiet believer becomes unavoidable. Not in terms of public labels or social titles, but in the role they played when no one else was watching. They were not merely someone the person knew. They were someone who understood them in a way that transcended explanation. They anticipated reactions. They respected silence. They trusted instincts even when the person doubted themselves. This level of connection cannot be fabricated. It cannot be replaced. It grows quietly over years of shared presence without demands. That is why their absence feels heavier now than it did at first. The person is beginning to understand that their influence did not end with their life. It was structured to continue through them, not as control, but as continuity. This is the quiet believer's final way of saying that what they believed in does not disappear just because they are gone. Now the person in our story starts noticing subtle shifts around them. Conversations feel different. People listen differently. Situations carry an unfamiliar tension. This is because the world responds to change before it is announced. Even without words, even without confirmation, something has already altered in their energy. They are no longer moving toward possibility. Possibility is moving toward them. That shift attracts attention. Not all of it genuine. Some will sense opportunity. Some will sense loss. Some will sense that something they assumed was theirs has slipped away. This is not something the person caused. It is a reaction to alignment. The quiet believer anticipated this phase, and they trusted the person to navigate it with restraint. They knew the person would not rush. They knew the person would observe before acting. That patience is now their greatest protection. At this stage, the most important work happens in silence. Not every thought needs expression. Not every feeling needs explanation. The clarity the person is developing cannot be accelerated by external validation. It must settle naturally. The quiet believer understood that loud decisions attract chaos. Quiet decisions attract stability. That is why they lived as they did. That is why they revealed themselves only when words could no longer interfere. The person is now being invited to operate from the same place of calm awareness. This is not withdrawal. This is preparation. Every moment of stillness now strengthens their ability to carry what is coming without being consumed by it. What the person is about to realize next will change how they define connection. Soon, it will become clear that this was not the end of their relationship with the quiet believer. It was the transition point. The bond they shared was never dependent on presence alone. It was built on understanding, respect, and trust that extends beyond time. When this realization fully settles, the person will no longer see this as something given to them. They will see it as something entrusted to them. And that distinction will shape every decision they make from this point forward, whether anyone else understands it or not. At this final stage of the story, the truth no longer feels distant or theoretical. It has settled into the person's awareness like a quiet certainty that cannot be undone. They are beginning to understand that this was never meant to arrive with celebration or noise. It arrived with weight because weight forces presence. The quiet believer understood that abundance without awareness destroys more lives than it elevates. That is why this moment feels introspective instead of triumphant. The person is being asked, silently but firmly, to rise to a level of consciousness that few people ever reach. This is not about what they will own. It is about who they will become now that ownership is no longer a limitation. And that realization alone separates them from most people who chase things without understanding their cost. Here is the detail that most people outside this situation will never grasp. The quiet believer did not leave everything to the person because they feared what would happen to it without them. They left it to them because they feared what would happen to the person without understanding the truth. It was protection, not indulgence. It shields them from a future where unanswered questions would have haunted them. It closes loops they did not know were open. It explains why certain doors never closed completely in their life, even when they thought they had. The quiet believer was not controlling outcomes. They were stabilizing possibilities. They ensured that when the truth finally arrived, it would empower rather than break. That level of foresight is rare. And it was driven by care that was never meant to be visible while they were alive. Now, something internal begins to change in a noticeable way. The person stops seeking validation for this event. They stop needing others to understand. They realize that the depth of this decision cannot be explained without being lived. The bond they shared with the quiet believer was not built on constant interaction. It was built on recognition. Recognition does not need explanation. It simply exists. This is why, despite the magnitude of what they are receiving, they do not feel overwhelmed in the way others might expect. Instead, they feel steady, grounded, almost prepared. That feeling is not accidental. It is the result of years of unseen guidance that shaped their decision-making long before this moment arrived. They were being prepared without being told. This is also the moment where temptation quietly appears. Not temptation in obvious forms, but subtle ones. The temptation to rewrite their story for others. The temptation to prove something. the temptation to respond to curiosity with disclosure. Resist that urge. The quiet believer trusted their discretion more than their ambition. They knew that truth revealed too early attracts the wrong intentions. They knew that silence preserves clarity. That is why they waited until silence was the only option left. Their absence ensures that no one can manipulate their words or reinterpret their intent. All that remains is the decision itself. Clear, final, unchangeable. And that clarity now becomes their anchor. As the person in our story moves toward what comes next, they remember this above all else. They are not stepping into someone else's legacy. They are continuing a belief that was quietly invested in them long ago. This does not define their worth. It reflects the worth that was already seen in them when nothing else was visible. The most powerful part of this entire story is not that they were chosen. It is that they were trusted. Trusted to see beyond appearances. Trusted to act without being consumed. Trusted to carry something forward without needing applause. And when they fully accept that truth, they will realize that this did not change their path. It simply revealed how carefully that path was protected all along. Now, let me ask you directly. Is there someone in your life who has believed in you quietly? Someone who never asked for credit? Someone who supported you without announcing it? Someone who opened doors without leaving their name? Someone who watched you struggle and still believed you would make it? If there is, do not wait until they are gone to notice. Do not wait until the truth arrives too late. Do not wait for a document or a final wish to open your eyes. See them now. Thank them now. Appreciate them now, while they are still here. While you can still say the words. And here is an even deeper question. Who are you believing in quietly? Who are you watching with hope? Who are you supporting without recognition? Who are you investing in silently? Who are you protecting without them knowing? Because the greatest inheritance any of us can leave is not money. It is not property. It is not power. It is the quiet, steady, unshakable belief that someone else is capable of becoming more than they can yet imagine. That belief costs nothing to give. And it is worth everything to receive.